Do you really think you know the person sleeping beside you? Do you think their casual, cutting remarks are just meaningless static? You are mistaken. You just haven't adjusted the frequency to hear the conspiracy. In my story, that frequency was the sharp sound of ripping silk. This is the blueprint for the collapse. My name is Eliza Vance. I am 38 years old, and tonight, I am a ghost haunting the edges of my husband's spotlight. The air in the grand ballroom is thick enough to chew. It's the annual gala for Aurelian Vanguard, the apex predator of New York luxury branding firms. The atmosphere is a pressurized blend of competing, expensive perfumes, the faint, savory fog of past hors d'oeuvres, and the sharp, metallic scent of naked ambition. It's suffocating. This is Julian's church, and he is its most devout worshiper. He forced me to come. Julian Croft, my husband, the senior vice president of strategy, thrives in this environment. He's a predator in a bespoke suit, charming, handsome, and utterly, meticulously cruel. In the taxi on the way here, he hadn't looked at me, just at his reflection in the darkened window. "Eli, for God's sake," he'd hissed, adjusting his tuxedo cuffs. "It's the annual gala, not a PTA meeting. Could you look any less relevant?" I was wearing a simple dress of heavy oyster-colored linen. It has no label he would recognize. To him, it is old. It is plain. It is everything he despises. "It's comfortable," I'd said, my voice flat. "Comfort is a weakness," he replied, and that was the end of it. Now, his hand is clamped on the small of my back, steering me through the crowd like a piece of inconvenient luggage. He spots his target, Marcus Thorne, the CEO, and a cluster of senior partners. Julian's smile widens, his teeth white and predatory. "Marcus," Julian booms, his voice resonating with false camaraderie. He pulls me sharply to his side. "You remember my wife, Eliza." Marcus Thorne, a man whose tailored suit probably costs more than my car, gives me a brief, dismissive nod. His eyes graze over my linen dress and instantly categorize me as irrelevant. I am the dowdy appendage to his star executive. Julian laughs, a practiced sound intended to draw in the circle. "My wife, she's got vintage tastes. Adorable, right. Eli." He pats my back, a gesture that feels more like a shove. "Try not to spill any champagne on the clients, darling." The group chuckles. It's a polite, sharp sound, the noise of subordinates acknowledging their superior's attempt at humor. I feel the familiar cold burn of humiliation rise in my chest, but I deploy the smile. It is my greatest shield, the vacant, slightly nervous smile of Eli Vance, the quiet wife. It makes them comfortable. It makes them forget me. "I'll be careful," I murmur, looking at a point just past Julian's shoulder. He's already turned away, his focus secured. He has achieved his goal, establishing himself as the brilliant executive who, charmingly, has to manage a quaint, simple-minded wife. That's when she appears, gliding into the circle as if summoned. Cleo. Cleo is the junior brand manager, probably 26, and she is everything this room values. She is fire and hunger, poured into a skin-tight, blood-red dress that looks like it was stitched directly onto her skin. She is Julian's current project, in every sense of the word. "Julian, that was an incredible speech earlier," she says, her voice a low purr. She rests a hand on his forearm, a casual, proprietary touch. "Cleo, you look spectacular," Julian replies, his eyes devouring her. He looks at Marcus. "This is the fresh perspective I was telling you about." Cleo's gaze lands on me. It is a masterpiece of feigned kindness. Her eyes, bright and assessing, scan my old dress, and her perfectly painted lips curve into a small, pitying pout. "Eliza, it's so good to see you out," she says, her tone dripping with false sincerity. "You look so comfortable." I hold her gaze. I force myself not to look at Julian, who is watching this interaction with a smug, satisfied smirk. I don't look at Cleo's face. I am looking at her dress. It's the centerpiece of the new collection Julian just secured exclusivity for, the campaign that is supposed to redefine Aurelian's entire portfolio. I look at the seam work. My eyes trace the darting on the bodice, the way the fabric is supposed to drape across the hip. The stitching is tight, too tight for this particular cut of silk. It's pulling. It's creating a faint, almost invisible pucker right above the waist. The alignment is off by maybe 2 millimeters. It's a fake, a high-quality counterfeit, but a fake nonetheless. The kind of error only the person who designed the original pattern would ever spot. I maintain my bland smile. Thank you, Cleo. That's very kind of you. Julian, satisfied with the power play, dismisses me with a final pat. Run along, Eli. Go get yourself one of those little crab cakes. He turns back to Cleo and Marcus, steering them toward the champagne tower. He thinks this night is a triumph. He believes he has reinforced his position, subtly reminding everyone of his power by openly disrespecting his own wife. He thinks he has put me, the faded, boring woman, squarely in my place. He has no idea that the war has already begun. He doesn't know that the woman he just humiliated is the only reason his company has a luxury line to sell at all. He just lit the match, and he's standing in a room soaked in gasoline. I waited another 10 minutes, just long enough for the chill of the air conditioning to set in. I drifted near a service exit, sipping water, my bland smile fixed in place. I watched Julian laugh, his head tilted back, his hand once again on Cleo's back. He hadn't looked for me once. I slipped my phone from my small, unremarkable clutch and sent him a text, terrible headache. Going to have to leave. Feel better tomorrow. Good luck, darling. I didn't wait for a reply. I knew one wouldn't come for hours. And when it did, it would be a curt K. The blast of humid night air on the street was a baptism. I shed the suffocating oppression of the gala like a heavy coat. I walked a full block, the clicking of my modest heels echoing, before raising my hand. A taxi, glowing yellow, cut across 2 lanes to get to me. Where to, lady? I didn't give him the address of our pristine, sterile apartment on the Upper West Side, the glass box Julian had chosen. I gave him an intersection in the meatpacking district, a place of old cobblestones and reclaimed industrial grit. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his gaze dismissive. A plain woman in a plain dress, heading downtown. I was already invisible again. I leaned my head against the cool glass and closed my eyes, letting the Eliza Vance persona dissolve. The cab dropped me on a dark corner. The building in front of me was a brute of brick and steel, built 100 years ago, with no name on the door. I used a simple key, not a fob, to open a groaning steel door and stepped into a freight elevator, the kind that smelled of oil and metal. I pressed the button for the penthouse, using my thumbprint on a scanner hidden beside the panel. The doors opened not into a hallway, but directly into my world. It was a single room, a cavern of 5,000 square feet, with 20-foot ceilings and massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson. But the view was secondary. The space was a temple of creation. Bolts of fabric Japanese silks, Belgian linens, Italian leathers were stacked floor to ceiling on one wall. On another, massive touch-screen monitors displayed CAD designs and fluctuating market data. Mannequins stood in a silent army, draped in half-finished concepts. 3 3D printers hummed quietly in a corner, extruding experimental hardware for handbags. This was my office, my studio, my arsenal, and my true home. Eliza Vance is a construct, a carefully crafted illusion of mediocrity. I am Onyx. I am the chief designer and creative force behind the Vanguard Collective, the parent company, the multinational entity that owns Julian's Little Sandbox, Aurelian Vanguard, and a dozen other brands. My anonymity isn't a quirk, it's the core of my brand. In a world of celebrity designers, Onyx is a ghost. My work speaks. I do not. Only 3 people on this planet know my face: our CEO, Marcus Thorne, my head of security, and my personal legal counsel, the quiet, mousy wife. The woman who doesn't understand high finance or branding. It's the most effective camouflage I have ever designed. It allowed me to move through the world, to watch, to listen. It gave me a direct line of sight into one of my own subsidiaries, a way to gauge the corporate temperature without anyone knowing the thermometer was present. And Julian was a convenient cover, a husband who was so wrapped up in his own perceived brilliance that he never once thought to look closely at the woman who supposedly shared his bed. I walked over to my main workstation and touched the screen. It lit up, showing the entire Aurelian Vanguard portfolio. I pulled up the file on the Odyssey campaign, the one Julian and Cleo are so desperate to win. The one built around the new luxury collection they are fighting to secure. It's my collection, the one I finished designing 6 weeks ago. I ran a hand over the linen of my dress, the dress Julian found so pathetic. I'd picked it from my personal archive. It's an original Halston from his 1972 spring line. It is a museum piece. It's worth more than his leased BMW. And he, the brilliant senior vice president of luxury branding, couldn't tell the difference between a priceless piece of fashion history and a thrift store cast-off. I had tolerated his ambition. I had tolerated his casual cruelties, his affairs, his suffocating ego. It was all noise, the cost of maintaining the cover. But tonight, something shifted. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was his smile when Cleo pitied me. It was the realization that he wasn't just overlooking me. He was actively, publicly, using my perceived weakness to bolster his own strength. He had made me a prop in his own pathetic power play. I stripped off the Halston and hung it carefully. I pulled on a simple black silk robe and sat at my desk. The headache was gone. I felt a cold, clean clarity I hadn't felt in years. The cover was no longer useful. The tolerance had run out. The suspicion wasn't new. It had been a low-grade hum in the background of our lives for months, easy to dismiss as the static of a dying marriage. But Julian had become careless. He, who was so meticulous about his image, had grown sloppy in his secrecy. His phone, which used to lie face up on the hall table, was now perpetually in his pocket. He angled his laptop screen away from me when he worked in the study, clicking windows closed if I entered with a cup of tea. He thought I was too stupid to notice. He thought Eli was too absorbed in her muted, pointless life to register the small signs of his betrayal. He was wrong. In my studio, I sat at my console, the real one, the central nervous system of the Vanguard Collective. As Onyx, I don't need to hack my own servers. I am the servers. I have administrator access to every file, every email, every expense report in every subsidiary, including Aurelian. Julian is an employee. I am the ecosystem. I bypassed his email. It felt too intimate, too messy. I didn't want his pathetic excuses or Cleo's fawning replies. I wanted something clean. I wanted something cold. I am a surgeon, and I was looking for the tumor. I went straight to finance. I pulled his corporate expense reports for the last 8 months. At first, it was exactly what I expected. The dinners. Client entertainment, J, Croft, C, Daniels, 2 guests. The charge was for just over $2,000 at Per Se, an intimate, obscenely expensive restaurant not meant for closing quarterly reports. I cross-referenced the clients with the corporate travel logs. The clients were in Singapore that week. Another charge, team-building luncheon strategy, $1,500. I pulled the receipt. It was a reservation for 2 at a hotel rooftop bar in Soho. I scrolled, the pattern emerging, stark and undeniable. It wasn't just Cleo. It was a lifestyle. He was using the corporate card as his personal slush fund to finance his affair. Then I found it. The charge that made the blood cool in my veins. Corporate gifting client retention. A single charge, 3 weeks ago, for $24,000. It wasn't to a catering company or a wine distributor. It was to a high-end jeweler. I had route access, so I pulled the itemized receipt. It wasn't 20 identical gift baskets. It was one item, a women's watch, platinum, diamond bezel. He wasn't just having an affair. He wasn't just sloppy. He was embezzling, flagrantly, arrogantly stealing from my company to adorn his mistress. The humiliation from the gala returned, but this time it was different. It was cold, sharp, and pure. It was rage. Why so brazen? Why now he was a man drowning, trying to plug a hole? I toggled screens, pulling up the master file for the Odyssey campaign. It was the white whale of the fiscal year, a massive 9-figure collaboration with a new, disruptive electric car brand. Landing this account would redefine Aurelian, and Julian was the one leading the pitch. I scanned the internal memos. Julian had been working around the clock. He had promised the board not just a win, but a complete market takeover. This was his shot at the presidency of Aurelian. He was desperate. I read the brief. I knew the client. I had taken the initial meeting with the car brand's CEO myself, as Onyx, via a secure video link. I was the one who decided to let Aurelian, my own struggling subsidiary, have a chance to pitch for it. The final irony landed on me with the weight of an anvil. The entire campaign, every pitch, every design, every strategy, required final approval from the head of the Vanguard Collective. It required final approval from me. Julian was stealing from my company, lying to his colleagues, and funding his affair, all in a desperate attempt to impress the very woman he dismissed as a quaint burden. The connection hit me so hard I almost laughed. His presentation. He had been working late for weeks, his energy frantic, his arrogance swelling. I opened the preliminary pitch deck he had submitted to the board. It was titled Odyssey: The Silent Revolution. I looked at the mood boards, the visual language, the core concepts. I stood up from my console and walked to a cluttered bookshelf, a place where Eliza kept her things. I pulled down a worn, canvas-bound sketchbook, my hobby, the one Julian often saw me doodling in while he watched financial news. Just some silly ideas, I'd always say, and he'd pat my head, his eyes never leaving the screen. I flipped through the pages, sketches of leaves, architectural details, notes on fabric, and there, from about 2 months ago, was page 71. It was a charcoal sketch of a sound wave morphing into the clean, aerodynamic line of a car. Underneath it, I had scribbled a tagline. I looked at the sketchbook. I looked at the screen. Julian's keynote slide featured the exact same design. His tagline, "The future is silent." He hadn't just been inspired by it. The page was gone. He had physically torn it from my book. He was stealing from Eliza to impress Onyx. He had no idea they were the same person. He had just handed me the scalpel. He was a fool, a greedy, lazy, predictable fool. He had stolen a single page when I possessed the entire library. My rage had cooled, settling into something far more useful, a cold, methodical certainty. He wanted the Odyssey campaign. He wanted the presidency. I would not just let him take it. I would hand it to him, wrapped in silk, weighted with lead. I spent the next 48 hours in my studio. This was not the work of Eliza, the hobbyist. This was the work of Onyx, the architect. I designed the entire Odyssey campaign, from its digital core to its physical launch. I sketched the logos, wrote the copy, designed the user experience flow for the app, and storyboarded the launch commercials. It was sharp, it was intuitive, it was disruptive. It was, quite simply, the most brilliant work I had done in a year. It was a campaign that could not lose. And then I inserted the poison. It was a single, fatal flaw buried deep within the creative brief. For the main launch event, I had designed a visual theme around a specific style of kinetic light photography. I referenced the work of a contemporary German artist, a man known for being brilliant, obscure, and viciously protective of his copyrights. To anyone else, the images looked like beautiful, generic streaks of light, to a lawyer, or to the artist himself. It was a declaration of war. A proper vetting process would flag it in an hour. But Julian was not a professional. He was a thief in a hurry. He would see the beauty, not the liability. I bought a new sketchbook, identical to my others. Then, for 3 hours, I sat and painstakingly degraded my work. I translated the perfect digital campaign into the hesitant, gifted amateur charcoal sketches of Eliza Vance. I smudged lines. I used imprecise, emotional language. I made it look like a daydream. That evening, I accidentally left it on the coffee table in our apartment. Julian came home late, his face a mask of stress and ambition. He was pacing, phone pressed to his ear, muttering about synergy and deadlines. "Eli, I can't talk," he snapped, seeing me on the sofa. "I'm buried." "Oh, of course, dear," I said, my voice soft and apologetic. I gestured vaguely to the table. "I was just sketching again. Silly ideas. I'll get it out of your way." His eyes snagged on the open page. I had left it on the storyboard for the launch commercial. He stopped pacing. He didn't hang up the phone, just lowered it from his ear. "What is that?" "Oh, nothing," I said, giving the required embarrassed titter. I heard you talking about that car, and it just gave me a silly idea." He picked up the book. I watched his eyes scan the page, then another, and another. The predator in him went still. He saw it. He saw the shortcut. He saw his promotion, his victory, handed to him on a platter by the fool he married. "It's naive," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "But there's a spark of something here. Leave it. I might look at it later, see if there's anything usable." He worked from home the next day, locking himself in the study. The following night, the text I was waiting for arrived, just after 6 p.m., going to be an all-nighter at the office. "Cleo and I are breaking this thing open. Don't wait up." I took a taxi to the meatpacking district, in my studio. I didn't turn on the main lights. I sat in the glow of my console. The entire Aurelian Vanguard server architecture spread out before me like a digital constellation. I opened the secure portal for the Odyssey project. At 7:15 p.m., the uploads began. One by one, high-resolution scans of my sketchbook pages appeared. My silly ideas digitized. Then came a new file, Odyssey Pitch Deck Final V1. I opened it. There it was. My entire campaign, stolen and repackaged. He had even used my exact wording from my handwritten notes. He copied the kinetic light visuals without changing a single element. And then, I watched in real time as he uploaded the final slide. It was a simple black background with white text. Project lead, Julian Croft, brand director Cleo Daniels. He had erased my faint penciled EV initials from the corner of the scans. He had deleted Eliza. He had deleted Onyx. He had, in his mind, created it all. I sat back, sipping a glass of water, and watched the man hang himself with the rope I had provided. He didn't come home until morning. He walked in just as I was pouring coffee, his face flush with victory, smelling faintly of Cleo's perfume. "Eli," he said, his voice brimming with a new, expansive arrogance. "You look tired, Julian," I said, playing my part. "Tired, but victorious," he said, laughing. He actually kissed me on the forehead. "I think I've done it. I think I've cracked the Odyssey campaign." He smiled, looking at a point over my head, already seeing his name on the president's door. "You know, it's funny," he continued, taking the coffee from my hand. "Cleo is really something special. She has this way of pulling the brilliance out of me. We were working all night, and she just inspires me. She helped me come up with some truly incredible stuff." I looked up at him, my face a perfect mask of admiration. "That's wonderful, Julian. I'm so proud of you." I let him enjoy his triumph. I watched him shower, whistling, and dress in one of his most expensive suits. He was radiating an obnoxious, frantic energy. He was a king, anointed by his own stolen genius. He left the apartment without a real goodbye. Just a big day. Eli tossed over his shoulder. The moment the door clicked shut, I made a call. I didn't call the number for the divorce attorney I had bookmarked on Eliza's laptop. That was a domestic problem, a sideshow. Julian's infidelity was an insult, but his theft was a declaration of war. This was a corporate matter, and it required a corporate solution. My call was to Marcus Thorne's secure line. 2 hours later, I was not in a lawyer's mahogany-paneled office. I was in a $20,000 a night suite at the Baccarat, a place so sterile and secure it felt like an operating theater. Marcus was already there, pacing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. He's the CEO of the Vanguard Collective, the public face of the empire. He's one of the 3 people in the world who knows that Eliza Vance is a phantom. He didn't greet me. He just pointed to a tablet on the glass table. "He's a liability," Marcus growled. His voice is like gravel. "I reviewed the data you flagged, the expense reports, the jeweler. The man is a common thief. He's stealing petty cash." "He's arrogant," I said, sitting down. I felt no emotion, just a cold sense of calibration. "He thinks he's a genius, and he's surrounded by people who are too scared or too stupid to tell him he's not, including me." "So we liquidate," Marcus said. "I'll have our counsel draft a separation agreement. We invoke the morals clause on his contract. We cite the embezzlement. We fire him for cause, quietly. He signs a non-disclosure agreement that's so restrictive he won't be able to manage a coffee shop in this town. We protect the brand. We protect Onyx." I shook my head. "No." Marcus stopped pacing. "No, Eliza. This isn't personal. This is risk management. We cut the cancer out before it spreads." "It is personal," I said, my voice quiet, but it cut through the silence of the room. "He humiliated me publicly. He used my perceived weakness to build his own reputation. He stole my work. If you fire him quietly, he'll play the victim. He'll tell everyone he was stabbed in the back by corporate politics. He will never, ever understand what he did. He will learn nothing." Marcus studied me for a long moment. "What do you want?" "I want it to be educational," I said. "I want a public reckoning. I want him to be standing in the spotlight of his greatest triumph when the floor gives way." A slow, grim smile spread across Marcus's face. He picked up his tablet. "Then let's review the contracts. His and yours." He pulled up Julian's Senior Vice President agreement. "Standard, Section 7, Morals Clause. Grounds for immediate termination for any action that brings the company into disrepute. Grand larceny-level embezzlement from his girlfriend certainly qualifies." He swiped. "Section 12, Intellectual Property. All work, concepts, ideas, and strategies developed by the employee during his tenure are the sole and exclusive property of Aurelian Vanguard. He signed away the rights to a campaign he didn't even create." "That's the cage," I said. "Now, show me the key." Marcus didn't need to look it up. He knew my contract by heart. It was the foundational document of the entire luxury division. "The Onyx Agreement," he said. "Section 9, the Key Person Clause. The clause is simple. I am Onyx. If I leave the Vanguard Collective, if I am terminated, or if I simply choose to retire, the company loses all rights to use the Onyx name and all associated intellectual property within 90 days. If I walk," I said, "the stock price of the collective is cut in half. The Aurelian Vanguard brand ceases to exist. Julian's entire career, his entire future, everything he just stole to get, vanishes. Not because he's fired, but because I decide to stop drawing." "You hold the hydrogen bomb, Eliza," Marcus said. "You always have." "I know. He just gave me a reason to use it." Marcus nodded, satisfied. He motioned to his personal counsel, who had been standing silently by the door. The lawyer stepped forward, carrying a slim leather portfolio. He placed it in front of me. I opened it. The top document was a petition for divorce. I scanned the grounds, prepared by Eliza Vance's real legal team. Fraud, adultery, embezzlement of marital assets. The second document was the civil suit, the one that truly mattered. Onyx LLC v. Julian Croft and Cleo Daniels. Theft of intellectual property. Corporate espionage. Conspiracy to defraud. I took the heavy pen offered to me. I signed Eliza Vance on the divorce papers. My hand was perfectly steady. I signed Onyx on the affidavit for the civil suit. I slid the portfolio back to the lawyer. "Wait," I said. "Do not file these." I looked at Marcus. He needs to make his presentation. He needs to stand in front of that board and claim my work as his own. He needs to win. The final presentation for Odyssey is scheduled for next Tuesday. Marcus confirmed. "Then that's the day," I said, standing up. "You will ensure the entire executive board is in that room. You will ensure the lawyers are on standby." I walked to the door, the ghost of Eliza Vance returning, settling over me like a shroud. Wait for my signal. The week before the presentation was like living inside a balloon being slowly overinflated. The air in our apartment was taut, humming, and thick with Julian's unbearable ego. He had won, in his mind. The presentation was a mere formality, a coronation. He stopped just being ambitious and became insufferable. He was a terrible actor, incapable of hiding his perceived triumph. He strode around the living room, talking not to me, but at me. "We're going to have to make some changes. Eli," he announced one evening, swirling a glass of scotch he'd poured before even taking off his coat. "This place, it served its purpose." He gestured dismissively at the minimalist, expensive furniture he had chosen. "But it doesn't reflect my new position. I'm thinking Greenwich, something with a proper driveway." I just looked up from the book I wasn't reading and nodded, deploying the meek, agreeable smile. "Whatever you think is best. Julian." "That's the problem, Eli," he snapped, suddenly impatient. "I'm the only one who does think. You'd be happy in a shoebox as long as you had your junk." His eyes flicked to a corner of the room where I kept a few antique dress forms, props for my Eliza persona. The crafts he so despised. His contempt had become a physical thing, a sour smell he carried with him. The day before, a bill had come. I'd seen it before he did. A personal credit card statement, not the corporate one. A single charge from Cartier for the exact amount of the watch I'd seen on the expense report. He wasn't just embezzling, he was double-dipping, expensing the gift and paying for it separately, likely to hide the evidence from his own company. He was buying his mistress a $24,000 watch while complaining to me that the $10 a yard muslin I bought for my hobby was a waste of money. "You're right, dear," I said, closing my book. "I'm not good with these big decisions. I'm just so proud of you." He softened, his arrogance fed. "As you should be." While he preened about his future, I played the part of the perfect, frightened, irrelevant wife. I nodded. I smiled. I said, "Yes, Julian," and, "Of course, Julian." And in the 15-minute windows when he was in the shower, I was on the phone with my private wealth manager. "Yes, that's correct," I'd whisper, my voice still Eliza soft, but the words precise. "Liquidate the joint bond portfolio. All of it. Move the currency to the Zurich holding account. No, not that one. The numbered one." I was dismantling our shared life, brick by financial brick, and he was too busy admiring his reflection in a skyscraper window to notice. Then, 3 days before the presentation, the real shock came. Julian was at the office. The doorbell rang, I opened it, and there was Cleo. She was not in her skin-tight battle armor. She was dressed in expensive, casual wear Lululemon leggings that cost $400 and a cashmere sweater. She looked concerned. It was a well-rehearsed, predatory concern. "Eliza," she said, her voice low and full of fake empathy. "Can I come in? I really think we need to talk. I am Onyx. I have negotiated 9-figure deals and stared down the most ruthless men in finance. I know a power move when I see one. She wasn't here to warn me. She was here to mark her territory. Of course, Cleo, I said, my Eliza voice fluttering with just the right amount of nervous confusion. Is everything all right? Is Julian okay? I led her to the kitchen. Can I get you some tea? Thank you, she said, sitting at the island, placing her hands palms down as if to claim it. Eliza, this is so hard, but as one woman to another, I feel like you deserve to know. I feel like you should hear it from me. I busied myself with the kettle, my back to her. Hear what Julian and we've become very close. She let that hang in the air. This Odyssey project, it's been intense. We've connected on a level that, well, she sighed, a perfect performance of reluctance. He's not happy, Eliza. He hasn't been happy for a long time. He feels held back. He's about to become one of the most important men in this city, and he needs a partner who can keep up. I turned around, holding 2 cups of tea. I placed one in front of her. My hand was not shaking. He doesn't love you, she said, dropping the last pretense of kindness. He's going to leave you after the presentation. I'm telling you this because I respect you, and I think you should leave first. Get out with your dignity. This was the move. She wanted me to run, to cry, to make a scene. She wanted to be able to tell Julian that I found out and couldn't handle it, solidifying her position as the stable, powerful partner he deserved. I sat down opposite her. I took a small sip of my tea. Thank you for your concern, Cleo, I said, my voice perfectly level, the Eliza flutter completely gone. She blinked, not expecting the calm. You're wearing the new Chanel flats, I said. They're lovely. Yes, she said, thrown off. I'm glad you're here. Actually, I continued, looking at her with a bland, analytical gaze. Something has been bothering me, and you're the only other one who would know. That dress you wore at the gala, the red one. What about it? She asked, her voice sharpening. The seam work on the bodice, I said, as if discussing the weather. It was a bias cut, but the stitching was a standard lock stitch, wasn't it? Not a flexible chain stitch. Cleo's face went blank. I don't know what you're talking about. It's why it was puckering, I said, taking another sip. Right at the waist. It was pulling the fabric, ruining the entire structure of the drape. It's a common mistake counterfeiters make. They replicate the look, but not the architecture. I let the silence sit there. I watched her perfectly curated expression curdle into confusion, and then a faint, dawning horror. She wasn't just wearing a fake. She had been caught by the mousy, clueless wife who shouldn't even know the word bodice. She stood up abruptly. I have to go. Of course, I said, smiling my bland Eliza smile again. It was so good of you to stop by. She practically fled. She didn't understand what had just happened. She just knew that the mouse she had come to exterminate had fangs. It was Monday, the day before the final presentation. I heard a sharp, choked noise from the study, a sound I had never heard Julian make. He emerged, his phone clutched in his hand, his face the color of ash. He looked completely through me, his eyes wide and vacant. My God, he whispered. Oh, my God. Julian, what is it you look ill? I said, my voice pitched with the perfect anxious flutter of Eliza Vance. An email, he said, his voice trembling. From Marcus Thorne's office. Is that bad? Did something happen? It's impossible, he said, reading the screen again. It says, Mr. Croft, the preliminary deck for the Odyssey campaign was forwarded, at my discretion, to Onyx. He swallowed hard. She is impressed. I watched him. This was the moment. She is so impressed, he continued, his voice cracking, that she is convening an in-person final review tomorrow, 10 a.m. In the main boardroom. I feigned the required confusion. In person. But Julian, you've always said she's anonymous, that no one ever sees her. No one does, he nearly shouted, a note of hysteria entering his voice. This has never happened. Not in the history of the company. She doesn't do meetings. She's a myth. He began to pace, his terror instantly, predictably, curdling into magnificent arrogance. His mind was already reframing the event. This is it, Eli, he said, his eyes gleaming. She's not coming to review me. She's coming to see the genius. She's coming to crown me. He laughed, a high-pitched, frantic sound. Who will be there? I asked, already knowing the answer. Everyone, he boomed, suddenly energized. The entire global board. Marcus is flying in from London tonight. The heads of legal, finance, all of them. They're all coming to watch me win. He grabbed his phone, his thumbs flying, his face alight. He was, of course, texting Cleo. I didn't need to read it. I could see it in the triumphant, predatory set of his shoulders. It's ours. We're about to run this place. He spent the rest of the day as an exposed nerve, screaming at his assistants, rerunning his slides, and admiring his own reflection in the dark windows. That night, he barely looked at me. I'm going to the office, he announced. Cleo and I are going to drill this until it's flawless. This is for all the marbles. Eli, don't wait up. The moment the elevator doors closed, I left. I didn't go to the apartment. I went to the studio. I did not power up my console. I did not review the legal filings. I went to the far wall, to a locked, climate-controlled cabinet. I pulled out a bolt of fabric I had been saving for 3 years. It was a Japanese wool silk weave, a deep, matte charcoal black. It was a fabric that seemed to drink the light around it. For the next 8 hours, I was not a wife. I was not a victim. I was a master of my craft. The studio was silent except for the whisper of the fabric and the clean, decisive snick of my shears. I was not nervous. I was not angry. I was in a state of pure, cold focus. I was making my armor. I cut the jacket with a sharp pagoda shoulder line. I structured the lapels to be severe, aggressive. The trousers were high-waisted, fluid, and unforgiving. It was a suit that did not ask for attention, but commanded it. It was the uniform of onyx, made flesh. I returned to the apartment at 5 a.m. Julian was already awake, pacing the living room, a mess of stale coffee and raw ambition. He hadn't slept. Eli, where the hell were you? He snapped. I couldn't sleep. I lied, my voice small. You were so stressed. I went for a walk. He waved his hand, dismissing my entire existence. I don't have time. I don't have time. He pointed a shaking finger at a garment bag hanging from the closet door. This is it. This is the biggest day of my life. Of our lives. I need you to be useful. I need my shirt. The blue one. The one for the French cuffs. Iron it. Now. And it has to be perfect. Do you understand me? Perfect. He vanished into the steam of the shower, already shouting at someone on his phone. I set up the ironing board. I took out the $400 Sea Island cotton shirt. I pressed it with the precision of a diamond cutter. The collar was crisp. The placket was flawless. The sleeves were perfect. Then, I took my smallest pair of embroidery scissors from my hobby box. I examined the left cuff. Not the main cufflink hole, but the small secondary button that fastens the sleeve placket above it. A tiny, functional detail. I didn't cut the thread. That would be too obvious. I took the tip of the scissors and carefully snagged one single fiber of the white thread. I pulled it, hard, until I felt a faint, internal pop. It was done. The button would hold when he dressed. It would hold in the taxi. But sometime during the presentation, when he was gesturing, when he was at the absolute peak of his self-congratulation, the thread would give, the button would pop, the cuff placket would gape open. It was a tiny, insignificant flaw, a loose thread, just enough to break a fragile man's focus. Your shirt is ready, Julian. I called out, my voice bright and supportive. The main boardroom on the 50th floor was a cathedral of glass and steel, designed to be intimidating. The air was pressurized, silent. The long, obsidian table reflected the gray New York sky. Around it sat the entire executive board of the Vanguard Collective, men and women who had flown in from London, Tokyo, and Dubai. Marcus Thorne sat at the head, his face an unreadable mask of granite. At the other end of the table, opposite Marcus, sat an empty chair. It was slightly larger than the others. It was Onyx's chair, as always. It was symbolic, a reminder of the ghost in the machine. Julian and Cleo stood at the front, bathed in the light of the massive projector screen. He was electric. He was performing, not presenting. He was a conductor, a maestro, intoxicated with the sound of his own voice and the importance of the room. He savored every synergy, every buzzword, every stolen concept. Cleo stood beside him, her gaze fixed on him, reflecting his brilliance, a perfect, polished accessory. "We are not just selling a car," Julian declared, his voice booming with a confidence that was entirely unearned. "We are selling a silent revolution." He was pacing, using his hands, radiating power. He made a grand, sweeping gesture to emphasize a point about first-quarter projections. It was then that the thread I had weakened finally gave way. I knew the exact moment. A flicker. He glanced down at his left cuff. His eyes narrowed, just for a fraction of a second. The perfect ironed facade had a flaw. The placket of his sleeve was gaping. He tried to hide his hand, tucking it awkwardly behind his back as he spoke, but his rhythm was broken. His seamless performance now had a snag. A tiny bead of sweat appeared on his temple. He clicked to the next slide, forcing his composure to return. This was his finale, his masterpiece. "And here, ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice dropping to a reverent hush, as if unveiling a holy relic. "This is the future of the brand." On the screen, my designs flashed. The kinetic light photography, the fatal flaw, presented as the crown jewel of his genius. As the image settled, as the board members leaned in to absorb it, the heavy, soundproofed doors at the far end of the room opened with a silent, hydraulic hiss. Every head in the room turned. Julian stopped, his mouth half open, the word brand still echoing in the air. I walked in. This was not Eli Vance, the mousy wife in her faded linen. This was a woman they had never seen. I was wearing the charcoal black suit, the one I had built like armor. The shoulders were sharp, the lines severe, the fabric drinking the light in the room. My heels made no sound on the thick carpet, but every step was an impact. My hair was pulled back into a tight, severe knot at the base of my neck. I did not look at the board. I did not look at Cleo. I walked past the empty chair and stopped, my gaze fixed directly on my husband. He froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly, pale mask. His carefully constructed performance shattered. He saw me, but his brain could not process the data. This was not the woman who ironed his shirts. This was a contamination, an invasion. "Eli," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. The microphone, still active, picked it up and amplified his confusion across the silent room. "Eli, what the hell are you doing here?" He looked wildly around, his panic rising. "Get out, security. Someone get her out of here." Cleo looked like she had seen a ghost, her face pale and slack. The board members were murmuring, confused, looking to Marcus to handle this bizarre domestic interruption. Marcus Thorne, at the head of the table, did not move. He watched Julian's entire meltdown. Then, slowly, he stood up. The room went absolutely silent. "Eliza," Marcus said. His voice was calm, clear, and cut through Julian's panic. "We're glad you could make it." He turned his gaze, cold and heavy, away from me and onto Julian Croft, who was still sputtering, his face turning a blotchy, furious red, his hand frantically trying to fix his flapping cuff. "Mr. Croft," Marcus said, his tone lethal. "I wasn't aware you and our chief designer were so close." The silence in the room was a physical weight. It pressed down, absolute and heavy. Every member of the board, titans of industry and finance, was staring at the impossible equation, the mousy, dismissed wife and the anonymous, mythical designer. They were the same person. Cleo, who had been standing slightly behind Julian, made a small, choking sound. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the waxy, green-tinged pallor that washed over her face. She looked like she was going to faint. Julian's eyes darted from Marcus back to me. His brain was visibly short-circuiting, trying to reconcile the woman who ironed his shirts with the woman Marcus Thorne stood for, the flawed cuff, the impossible situation, the terror. It all culminated in a single strangled sound. "Chief designer," he stammered, the microphone picking up the dry crackle of his voice. "What? What does that mean?" "You mean?" "Onyx." I didn't answer. I just held his gaze. I let him see me, really see me, for the first time in our entire marriage. I let him see the woman who had listened to his boasts, tolerated his insults, and silently cataloged every single one of his sins. The arrogance that had defined him collapsed in real time, replaced by a raw, primitive, animal-in-a-trap panic. I took 2 steps forward, toward the podium. He was still clutching the presentation clicker, his knuckles white. I held out my hand. He flinched, but I just waited. I plucked it from his limp fingers. He offered no resistance. His hand fell to his side, his arm useless, his flapping cuff a flag of his surrender. I turned to the board. My voice was not the soft murmur of Eli Vance. It was the clear, cold, precise tone of Onyx, and it filled the room. "Julian, Cleo, thank you both for presenting this," I said. "It has been illuminating." I aimed the clicker at the screen. "You can all disregard the last 4 slides. This campaign is rejected." I clicked back, not to the beginning, but to the centerpiece, the image of the kinetic light. "This," I said, my voice sharp as a scalpel, "is the fatal flaw I inserted into my sketches. It is a direct, uncredited, and unlicensed visual appropriation of the work of a German artist, a man who, my legal team confirmed this morning, has successfully sued 2 other corporations for 8-figure settlements." I glanced at the head of the legal department, a man who was now sitting bolt upright, his face ashen. "This campaign, as presented by Mr. Croft, represents a minimum legal exposure of $80 million. You and Ms. Daniels, Julian, in your rush to claim this brilliant idea as your own, failed to conduct the most basic due diligence." A high-pitched, desperate wail tore through the silence. It was Cleo. She wasn't just crying, she was disintegrating. She rounded on Julian, her face a mask of terror and rage. "You said you checked it," she shrieked, her voice unrecognizable. "You said it was clean. You told me it was yours. You said you had it handled." Julian didn't even look at her. He was still locked on me, his breathing shallow. "He lied," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through Cleo's sobs. I clicked the remote again. The pitch deck vanished. In its place, a simple black-and-white spreadsheet. He lied about this, just as he's been lying about his expenses. If the room was silent before, it was now a vacuum. The spreadsheet was a line-item summary of Julian's corporate account. The title was clear: J. Croft, Discrepancy Report, and his use of the company credit card for Ms. Daniels here. I continued, my voice a dispassionate monotone. I highlighted a line with the laser. A $24,000 watch from Cartier, filed under Corporate Gifting Client Retention. A weekend at the Amman, filed under Client Strategy Session. A series of dinners at Per Se, totaling over $12,000, filed under team building. I looked at Marcus. Our team is, apparently, very small. The evidence was absolute. The affair, the theft, the profound, staggering arrogance of it all, laid bare. Julian finally found his voice. It was not a word. It was a roar of pure, wounded animal rage. "You can't," he bellowed, his face a mottled, terrifying shade of crimson. He lunged, not at the screen, but at me. "You can't do this. You're my wife. You're nothing. You ironed my shirt." He was 2 feet from me. His hands clawed. When 2 security guards summoned silently by Marcus minutes ago materialized and seized his arms, slamming him back against the table. He struggled, a pathetic, thrashing mess in his bespoke suit, his flawed cuff finally ripping open. I did not flinch. I did not move. I looked into the eyes of the man who had mocked my clothes, my hobbies, my very existence. "I not only can, Julian," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. "I just did." The security guards were immovable, holding Julian as he thrashed against their grip. His suit was torn at the shoulder, his face slick with sweat, his meticulously crafted image dissolving into pure, impotent rage. "Let go of me! Do you know who I am?" Cleo, seeing the man she had hitched her wagon to reduced to a restrained animal, made her last, desperate calculation. The rat, seeing the ship sink, was the first one to jump. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Julian, her voice a piercing shriek aimed at Marcus and the board. "It was him. It was all him. I didn't know about the artist. He told me they were his ideas, his. He said the expenses were approved. He used me. He used me." Julian stopped struggling. He just hung there, limp in the guard's grasp. He stared at me, his eyes burning with a hatred so profound it was almost clarifying. He was finally seeing me, but all he could see was the phantom he had created to justify his own contempt. "You," he spat, the word thick with venom. "This was you. You did this. After everything I gave you, after I dragged you into my world, you're nothing," he screamed, his voice breaking. "You're just a pathetic little mouse, a mouse in your old clothes." A dead silence fell over the room. He had said it. He had finally provided the punchline to his own joke. I took a step closer to him. I smoothed the lapel of my suit, the one I had made. "My old clothes, Julian," I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You mean the oyster-colored linen dress, the one you mocked me for at the gala?" I turned my gaze to Marcus Thorne, who was watching this execution with a cold, grim satisfaction. "You remember that dress, Marcus. It's been a while." I looked back at Julian. His eyes were wide, the last traces of his fury giving way to a sickening, cold confusion. "That old dress," I said, my voice rising, cutting through the silence of the boardroom, "was a 1972 Halston. I wore it 7 years ago, when I flew to London to sign the foundational contract with Marcus, the contract that established Onyx LLC as the sole creative partner for the Vanguard Collective. I let that sink in. I let him process it. I wore that old dress, Julian, on the day I created your company, Aurelian Vanguard, as my first subsidiary project. It was my test run." He just stared, his mouth hanging open. The realization was dawning, but it was too monstrous for his ego to fully absorb. He was still searching for a flaw in the logic. "And the luxury collection," I continued. "The one you were so desperate to secure, the one you and Cleo built your entire future on by stealing my silly little sketches." I looked at him. No pity, no anger, just the cold, clean finality of an audit. "It's called the Vance Collection. It is my first ever personal line. I named it after my mother." That was the moment, the final critical piece of the puzzle slotted into place. I watched his mind finally, fatally, connect the dots. I didn't just design for his company. I was the company, his title, his salary, his ambitions, his entire fragile identity. It was all a branding exercise I had allowed to exist. And now, I was discontinuing the line, as if summoned by that final devastating realization. The boardroom doors opened one last time. It wasn't security. It was a man in a quiet, conservative suit, carrying a slim leather portfolio. He walked past me, past the horrified board, and stopped at the table. He placed two thick, blue-backed documents directly in front of the space where Julian was being held. "Mr. Croft," the lawyer said, his voice flat, "you are being served." I saw the captions. One was the petition for divorce, citing fraud and embezzlement of marital assets. The other was the civil summons for theft of intellectual property. Julian stared at the papers. He made no move. He was a hollowed-out shell. The fight was gone. Cleo had collapsed into a chair, her sobs now just a low, gasping, pathetic noise. I had seen enough. The education was complete. I turned away from the wreckage. I looked at Marcus Thorne, who simply nodded at me, a silent, profound acknowledgement. "Marcus," I said, my voice all business, the transformation absolute. "The morals clause has been explicitly violated by both of them. Terminate their contracts immediately. Have your team liaise with my lawyers when the cleanup is finished." I turned, adjusted the cuff of my jacket, and walked past the silent, staring board members. I walked past the empty, symbolic chair that had once represented a ghost. I walked out of the boardroom, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I did not look back. I left Julian and Cleo in the ruins of the life they had tried to build by stealing from mine. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments so we can connect and share our thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and show your support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.